皆さん、こんばんは。
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. To hear the simultaneous interpreting, please select an audio channel by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom right of the Zoom screen. This program is organized by ISIC Japan in association with James and produced by Bloom Pacific and Versatech. Supporters in alphabetical order are BAE Systems, L3 Harris Technologies, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon Technologies. Interpreters are Christopher Field and Paul Hershey. I would like now to turn the floor over to former Special Advisor to Prime Minister Abe's cabinet, Dr. Taniguchi Tomohiku, to moderate this defense industry forum on the topic of strategic alignment, constraints on the industrial base. Welcome everyone to this seminar. As we increase the number of iterations of this seminar, we are getting very important key people, precious people to are willing to participate, and many new listeners. And we are also overcoming the limits and walls of time and language. We have very superb interpreters who are able to overcome the limits of English and Japanese for us. Today, I say, as we have until now, but even more than we have done until now, assembled a blue ribbon panel. Everyone is very welcome, is very familiar with Rui Matsukawa, who is a member of parliament of the Diet, as well as a person with experience, who has direct experience in the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She was also a leader in the Marine Self-Defense Force, has always supported the self-defense force and the defense industry, a very long history as a journalist, very unusual. Finally, from Higurashi-san, we have from Kasumigaseki, who is going to ask, do we really have a defense industry in Japan? We need to question that from the base. What we need most is a defense industry and a link to the associated academic world, which is a very difficult thing to accomplish. I would rather listen to these individuals and hand the microphone directly to Diet member Matsukawa.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Perhaps I should say good evening to those in Japan. I am Rui Matsukawa, member of the House of Councilors elected from Osaka. And I am in the LDP working on defense matters. But I was working with many members of our self-defense forces in the defense ministry earlier. And if we do nothing, will we be able to maintain our defense base? I believe it's a very serious problem. Mr. Taniguchi, I worked for 23 years at Kasumigaseki as a diplomat in the foreign ministry. And compared to the situation then, if one looks at the defense industry, a lot of Japanese companies are getting out of the business. And it's the maintenance and strengthening of our defense base is not an industrial policy, but it should be a defense policy. Mr. Taniguchi has been involved in these issues for quite a long time. And so as a politician, I have several items that I think about that I believe I should take action on. And if you look at our defense spending, it's very low compared to other countries as a percentage of GDP, but half of that is for personnel. And then that which is not on personnel, much of it is spent on FMS more and more. It's procured abroad. For example, the F-35 can only be bought from the US, can't be made by Japan. And so the percentage of imports, I think it was 9% 10 years ago, and now I think it's up to about 20%. So if you look at the current defense spending, and the fact that the only customer for the defense industry is the defense ministry, as I said earlier, the way you look at this problem, I went to MHI, JMU, Mitsubishi Electric, NEC. I visited many defense-related industrial companies. And from their perspective, the market has to be increased. They only have one customer. And so the ability to sell abroad is something that's important. Mr. Higurashi was cooperating in some of the meetings that I organized. But with other dietmanners, I have a proposal here to promote the defense industry. The defense minister and in the future, the foreign minister and the former Prime Minister Abe was also invited. But the national security strategy will be updated, and defense equipment transfer should be clearly written as being something that's important to our security. If you look at other countries, the UK, the US, they all have different methods, but the government takes the risk for the companies. From R&D to transfer abroad, the government's put a lot of effort into this. With the Defense Equipment Agency at the center, in Japan, for example, countries in Southeast Asia or with Europe could be joint development. There's already work underway with aircraft with the UK. The government should be promoting this. And there are a lot of excellent staff in the MOD and in the equipment agency, but they're not necessarily skilled in sales. So perhaps people from trading houses could be sent to target countries, to our embassies there, to try to engage in matchmaking in the market and to creating networks. This kind of a cooperative network could be set up even within the within ATLA. More efforts to harness the power of the private sector could be made, I believe. Another point, in promoting this, there are several obstacles. And that is the implementation of the three principles for transfer of defense technology and equipment. Now, it's not a very active set of principles. It's rather passive in saying that it's okay to do it. So they could be rewritten, but there's also a problem in their implementation and the way that they're carried out. If one goes to an international exhibition, for example, then the principles require, the way that they're implemented requires a firm written promise, which causes the industry just to give up. I've heard of cases of such failures. Another thing should be for offsets. If the government doesn't give more overseas development assistance, it might be difficult to make this business happen, according to some industry sources. So defense equipment transfer is not just for the purpose of maintaining our industrial base, but let's say if the Indonesian government buys ships from Japan, maintenance services contracts could flow from that. And there could be other spin-off effects, such as sales of helicopters to be put on those ships. And from that perspective, too, this is something that should be pursued actively. Finally, technological innovation must be continued even in the defense industry. Otherwise, it will not be effective. But in the private sector, profits can be used to invest, but I think that this is not sufficient in this case. For example, we do support the small and medium-sized enterprise. We could fundamentally strengthen our defense research budget to have cooperative efforts with the government. It might not be all industries, but for example, if one looks at ships, it's only JME and Mitsubishi Heavy. It takes about 5 years to build a ship. These are the only two companies being able to do it. It's hard to keep your engineers unless you have steady orders. In the past, there was a system whereby the Director General of the Defense Agency could select suppliers. So now it might be a ministerial selection, but different ways of procurement should be considered. I think we should be very clear about how we create competition in this area. The national security strategy, the midterm defense plan, and the national defense program guidelines should all reflect these items, these basic documents. We're in a tough security environment, and I'd like to do everything I can to help. And I will be facing an election, but this will be the efforts that I'll be undertaking.
Thank you, Matsukawa-san. We have some very short question. A very short question. It's a response to a new plan for defense. Within what you were talking about, you said that there was a time when you issued a report and you went to explain it to Prime Minister Abe. It wasn't really a report. It was a study session that we held about how to do
study group
military equipment transfers,
in which there are a lot of young participants trying to promote defense equipment transfer
context.
And it's
I
participated
mentioned that
in by
in my
volunteers,
Twitter
and my
Facebook in
has it.
English.
I wonder if it's available in English.
Is it possible to read that actually in English? No, not yet. I can try. If there are people who are interested,
if there is
in it,
interest
overseas,
abroad,
then
then
I
perhaps we can get it
think it would
translated.
be possible to provide a translation. Okay, I think if we could get that I guess it would take a little more time to put it in a form that people could read overseas. Yeah, the original thought was to treat the influence as I said, this is something that the whole country has to put effort into, this effort to create the opportunity for equipment transfers overseas. And that was, it was more that content focused than any concept. So it wasn't something that I had been thinking about as something that would be read by people overseas, but if there are people who are interested, then certainly I think it would be something that I could translate. If you could, have you thought about talking about this with overseas, for example, reporters, at least on a summary basis? Yes, if I could do that, that would be great. That would be positive question. I think if we got that sort of questions, that would be something I'd want to respond to. Thank you. You spoke exactly the amount of time that we had asked. Okay, next I would like to go to Mr. Take, who has previously, is now retired, but has been very active since his retirement from the military. He's talked about Japan's responses to the Taiwan issue, for example, being still insufficient. Today, he's going to talk about the weapons that Japan needs to be thinking about, military force weapons. Thank you very much. Okay, if I could have the slides up on the screen, please. Could you please show the slides? Thank you.
Next, please.
Next slide. If I were to start from this conclusion, it's as described here. COVID-19 has caused a need for a change in industry. We are going to have to, two is we're going to have to review our security approach to China. Three is that we need to move to low signature, low cost systems, less manned systems, and that the targets will be Chinese systems. We need to be able to break through their kill ability. The fourth is that we need to, in order to increase the effectiveness of our military budget, to increase the, be able to practice more. We need to obtain best practices. Finally, we need to, in order to achieve equipment developments in the shortest possible time, increase our researches, and we need to be able to focus on competitiveness abroad. We can say this is the best opportunity to do these things has come to us now. This slide starts with 1959, since the establishment of the Self-Defense Force up until today, and looks at the international affairs, international situations effect on our defense. As you can see, that those effects are even affecting us today. We had about we had long periods when our resources were extended and then were not extended. But in we had 30 years where I want to talk about how the defense industry had an influence on our defense. In our next slide, please. During this period, each GATI function had limited budgets, which we still suffer from that weakness. We had limited scale. These are, in order to maintain this, we have to determine we were unable to address our threats sufficiently. And in order to do that, it's very important. I think the most important thing was the ability to explain the need for budgets to our politicians. Because we were not able to do that, we saw a long period where we had a hollowing out, which is still extending. Looking down here, we say that we have seen insufficient research funds that have been cut. We have not. We have weakened research foundations. The reliance is extremely high on the Department of the Ministry of Defense. The market is doing things that are only limited to what the Self-Defense Force requests. And that has weakened our position further. You are very well aware of the fact that our increases in budget for defense depend on further issuing of national debt. During 20 years, our defense industry was weakening for about 20 years. And so you can see that the Self-Defense Force we're not able to maintain our defense abilities. We've had a lot of distrust from the public. We lost incentives for innovations. We had no breakthroughs. We had only incremental ability to do innovation, and that is as shown in the slide. The third point is the obstacle of the three principles of weapons export. We were not able to look for the competitive advantages that would be have been able to provide for us. In this fall, a new strategy has been announced, and this is a very big turning point, and that I think this will be also a moment for our defense, national defense industry. First of all, we have certainly seen an increase in our defense budgets, but we still cannot. What we need is a higher efficiency. We have to overcome the old logic and review what we are doing. Because the second point is that our population itself is declining. It's going to go down to almost a third, by almost a third. So we can expect that the needs, on the other hand, are still growing for defense in the Indo-Pacific. So we need to have a transformation. We need to have a reformation so that we're able to export. The threat from China is real. The equipment to respond to that must be grown. We need to introduce hybrid methods, and we need to have a much higher, faster adoption of advanced technology into our equipment. And that involves all of the supply chain issues with international suppliers and so forth. Next, we're going to talk about the what kinds of military force we need to have. There's no question that we have to have A2AD ability to respond to China, and we have to have unmanned systems. We have to participate in the U.S. strategic concepts and create hybrid patterns. It is what's most important is the development of payloads more than the platforms and the Othello system. Japan and the US have to join together and build such a systems. In the 2+2 as just agreed between the US and Japan, we had full agreement on the network, the ability to create networks between us. We have not been able to contribute that much before this, but now we can do more against China with the hybrid ships.
Next, please. Finally,
this is the issues of Japan's defense industry. These are things you all know about. One, if I were to emphasize it, it would be getting away from the concepts or from the thinking that was implied in our legacy systems. In avionics, missiles, information systems, networks are the places where we need to do developments. These are difficult, but I think if we don't, we're going to have issues in East China Sea, and Japan's defense industry itself will weaken and diminish. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Take-san, very much. Everyone who is listening, I think, understand that you are speaking on with very specific points. There are many questions that have come in already. I don't know if we'll be able to get to them all, but everyone is taking notes, myself and the listeners. When people ask questions, we would like you to ask them as briefly as possible. Then we'll try to get to those. Then I would like to hand the microphone over to our next speaker, as I momentarily I introduced earlier, Ms. Sakurabayashi. With working by herself, without any help from anyone else, she has been following as a journalist, the Self-Defense Force. She's a very precious, I think, presence for all of us. Everyone who's got anything to do with the JDF, I would say there's no one who's involved in the Self-Defense Force who doesn't know her. She is, I would really like to hear what she has to say about her ideas of issues for the Self-Defense Force. Thank you.
I'm sorry about that. Thank you for your too generous introduction. I have engaged in a lot of conversations with people involved in the Self-Defense Forces. That's just about all I've done. We don't have much time, so I'll try to dive right in. Today, I'll be talking about the defense industrial base and what we should do about it, and the relationship with defense equipment transfer. There are a lot of arguments being thrown around. So I think that I'd like to emphasize the work of trying to, next slide, please. the work of trying to make things clear. It's a tough word. We have a word in Japanese called mabiki, or we're weeding out things that are thinning, let's say, things that you don't need. For example, when the families were poor, the smallest children were excluded, and that was a kind of a bad word, but it's said in the media that it's urgent that we rebuild our defense industry. I agree, but public opinion is saying that there should be selection and concentration. And many people take this as a positive term. But if you look at it in a bad sense, it's nothing other than thinning out. And concerning the maintenance of our defense base, I have some reservations about this terminology. It might be tough for those abroad to understand this, but the self-defense forces and their logistics system is very peculiar. Japan relies on private companies. Private companies carry out the functions of the self-defense forces. That is a very peculiar system, and protection is required. Next slide, please. My slides are very simple, just some keywords. Next slide, please. So this was the first slide. So we can move on to the next one. Yes. So there are a lot of things that are not suited for transfer. So Representative Matsukawa talked about transfer earlier, but equipment transfer cannot be a savior of our defense industry. So equipment transfer and the maintenance of our defense industrial base have to both be pursued separately. I think that companies may be a bit confused about this, so I wanted to clear this up from the outset as well. Next slide, please. Another keyword here. There's some misunderstandings about equipment transfer in Japan. Many defense companies are not necessarily negative. In the past, at the beginning, there were a lot of people that just didn't want to do it. To be honest, they're just doing it to help the self-defense forces. They don't want to do any such work for foreign militaries. It's kind of a lukewarm situation, it might be said. So it's not truly a defense industry. They are simply divisions or portions of larger companies. The average is only 3% of a company that might be working on defense matters. And it's not considered a merit, it's or advantageous, it's costly. And there's a lot of risk involved. This is something that is said quite a bit. If one exports, then the unit cost should go down, and that would be good. This is something that's often said, but initial investment is required in order to meet the specifications of the self-defense forces. If one were to export as well, then this could be a burden. There was not much of a of an incentive for prime contractors. But some of the suppliers have more of a 50%, 100% reliance on the defense sector. They have been received attention from China, for example. In order to protect them from such foreign investment, we should take certain policies. That's something that's been said. But we have to make these sorts of questions clear. If one wants to do exports, then one has to adjust the specs. And if one lowers the specs, then that might cause one to lose work. In any event, the environment of the defense industry has worsened, which has caused all of these arguments to arise. And therefore, there have been bankruptcies and exits from the defense sector. And that's why we are seeing a lot of studies about what should be done. Next slide, please. In 2013, the National Security Strategy was prepared. And there was language in there about strengthening the defense industrial base. It was taken up as a matter of national security. And there has been discussion about exports. But could you move on to the next slide, please?
Next, please.
And one more slide, please. In 2014, the three principles, well, before that, there was the defense production and technology base strategy in 2014. And then the three principles on the transfer of defense equipment. And next slide, please. And this was something that the Abe administration worked on, and I'd like to look at the content of it. From the perspective of proactive contributions to peace, Japan will engage further in this field. Please move on to the next slide. So the Abe administration's proactive contributions to peace took up transfer of defense equipment as a matter of international cooperation and contributions to peace. Not to rescue a dying defense industry, as is often said in the press, but rather as a means of international cooperation and cooperation to peace. Next slide, please. So it's defense equipment transfer as a matter of defense policy and foreign policy. And this has to be done separately as a matter of separately from the question of strengthening the self-defense forces logistical base as for purposes of strengthening defensive capability. And the government should be asking companies to do this. But now it's being seen in the opposite way. It's being said that, you companies are in a tough situation, so to help you companies out, it's okay for you to export. So it's a bit backwards, really. Now, even if companies would cooperate with the government, they would have to convince their shareholders. Talking to trading companies, would defense equipment transfer help share prices? If not, it will be hard to convince shareholders. They can be criticized as merchants of death. There's reputation risk. There have been demonstrations in front of companies that have gotten contracts. So, as Ms. Matsukawa said, there needs to be a system whereby the government is front and center supporting this. Capacity building is a term that might be changed because it's somewhat top-down system. Next slide, please. Japan is engaged in capacity building in various countries, and they are all for the purposes of proactive contributions to peace, and we can call out on industry to assist in these efforts. And strategic guidance can be prepared. It is necessary. Now, even if companies are interested, there's not a system in place fully yet. And so, for example, the initial investment might be hard to recoup. The latter might be taken out from under them. There are difficulties in implementation. There are about 5 items that have been decided, such as rescue or transportation. It's tough to give support, partly because of the foreign exchange law. So in a way, we're stepping on the gas and hitting the brakes at the same time. Next slide, please. Admiral Takei also mentioned this. Equipment that the Self-Defense Forces no longer needs has been provided to the Philippine military. This was something that we accomplished. Mitsubishi electric radars were successfully exported to the Philippines. In the background was a series of successive efforts. Self-defense members and industry were able to cooperate. Because of this cooperative stance, also this is written in the defense white paper. No matter how much a salesman in a suit talks, the buyer on the other side is always someone in uniform. And so it's very persuasive to hear something given by another person who is also in uniform, defense attaches, the chiefs of staffs of the 3 services, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Their efforts become very important. Of course, the activities of those in suits are important as well. Summits can be important for sales between heads of governments. And so we have to create an environment where what ATLA is doing is well known. All of these efforts have to be combined to create an atmosphere where transfers can be successful. Next slide, please. Trying to sum up, defense equipment transfer is different than maintaining our industrial base. That's part of the self-defense forces. The security environment is changing very much. What we don't need now might be needed in the future. Who would have predicted that masks would be such an important item now, for example? Finding key technologies and other strategies to promote growth are a matter of industrial policy, second. And third, defense exchanges, equipment transfers can be part of proactive contributions to peace. And we could create a Japanese version of FMS, self-defense force members must be proactive in doing this, and the government and its leaders must back them up. This is certainly necessary. Our wonderful Japanese technology, with our human policy, with our human resources of the self-defense forces and industry, I'm very much hope we will be able to create a very good team. Sorry to go on for so long.
Thank you, Sakurabaya-san. You've been your experience over many years as a journalist shows through. There was one thing that in the Q&A someone was showing a lot of frustration. We've seen that in the Q&A. Veterans, among them, veterans from the Jieitai, from the Marine Jieitai. And we all share that frustration. A country like Japan that is so advanced in technology, why does our defense industry not grow? Why are we not able to produce superb weapons, equipment? We all have that. We all share that frustration, and that's why we've opened this seminar. I would now like to turn to Mr. Higurashi, who at METI is handling and has responsibility for aircraft and military equipment. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I appreciate your inviting me to the webinar today and the opportunity to participate in this discussion with all of you. I am involved in security matters, and I took over the air defense part of the METI, and I'm looking at we have the important role of building the industrial base for this. This is also a matter of private industry. We have to this is in some ways similar to other industrial products. When we look at defense products, we have to have profitability, we have to have access to the market, and so forth. These are all important matters. I don't want to overlap with what has been discussed so far, but I would like to get into these matters a bit. The METI, where I work, is well known for materials, robotics, automobiles, aerospace. We participate in many different we are working on technology support and building up of medium and small size industries and so forth. getting out of, against the background also of getting out of decarbonization as a major theme. In the global market, the ability to get our
基盤を保持しています。国内だけの市場では十分な競争
competitiveness
力を
up
保
is
持することは
extremely important.
難しいでしょう。
We are,
一
it's probably difficult for us to have the good competitiveness in these
ございます。
defense fields. There are lots of concerns. There are no limits to the.
視点からサプライチェーン全
We
体
have
を
been looking at this supply chain and from the standpoint recently of economic security. And one theme of today, which is the defense industry, I would like to talk about some features of that.
1点目
The domestic defense industry. That first point is that our market is virtually limited to the Japan market. We have very difficult time in our domestic industry achieving low prices, competitive prices. Many people have pointed this out. If we look at automobiles, for example, if we were to be competing only within the Japanese market, we would have a hard time competing internationally. We are only, in many of our large industries, large companies, we have only a small percentage of their work is defense related. It's normal to have metabolism where growing and freaking, but there is also a need in this industry to have very high capital equipment, and we see a distinctly low operational utilization rate in many cases, which is also contributing to the inability to come down on prices. So we're not able to meet with the needs. It's if we look at large infrastructure systems such as power plants that we export, as was we're also looking at industries where there are constant changes in strategy and the needs. And so how do we agree to this? How do we meet this need? First of all, everyone who's working in these is working on it with pride and a sense of mission. That's what is required. It's difficult. In terms of profitability, there is the issue of pre-purchase. We need to have greater ability to explain the objectives to our politicians. We have very interesting considerations going on within the domestic aircraft industry.
規模の経済性の実現、非常に大事な問
We
題です。
need to have higher economies of scale. We need, within the principles of transferring overseas, we need to expand our ability to do so. We need to have discussions within the international strategy context, and we had to have more coordination between government and private industry. One point is components, key components. This is particularly when we're talking about our ally countries, this can be a very important contributor. U.S. alone constitutes half of the defense budget of the entire advanced world. We need to clear the limits and have our equipment recognized in the very much more stringent or competitive market. How do we create a positive circle instead of a vicious circle so that we can be recognized and create leverage in the foreign markets? We can do this in a way that is consistent with the three principles of equipment transfer. We have successful examples. On the other hand, this domestic industry of defense industries is different from other industries. It is the thing that supports our actual defense capability. And so it's difficult. For example, we looked at England, Israel, those industries in those countries are operating under the rubric of the national defense strategies. So it has to be consistent with the country's strategy. Finally, we need to create portfolios that are going to reflect the ability to expand abroad and return the benefits of that to our domestic industry. This would be the positive circle that I'm talking about. I would also like to talk about the economic development. We are responsible for the supply chain at METI. We explore, for example, in the small and medium industries. If we look at most of these supply chains have tier 2 and tier 3, the issue of component is extremely important. We often see that there is insufficient supply of parts, and this is not just true of foreign parts, but also domestic parts that cause people to exchange parts and hold up the. We contribute a lot of money under the COVID REWA year 2 and 3 budgets to support this. In my section, we are working to help support small and medium industry, and we're doing so in coordination with the Ministry of Defense to create a stronger industrial base. If we look at, we need to look at industry fields where we can concentrate our energy. This is a move that is going on underneath the direction of the Prime Minister's office. We want to see those brought down to detailed, specific project levels. We're next talking about technology that is multi-use, that can be used for both military and non-military purposes. We have a lot of superb technology, such as advanced materials. We need to act as a unified government to utilize that foundation for security and economic security. Again, in coordination with the Ministry of Defense, I think is essential. On the, I won't be able to talk further about the security and economic security aspects of emerging technologies and supply chains, and again, the positive chain that can create. But there are many issues still to coordinate, and that I would hope we can work with academia to strengthen our position with. That's all I want to say at this point.
五十嵐さんからは大変生々しくも重要なお話を伺うことができたと。
Thank you. A very direct and important discussion that you are giving us. As everyone has noticed, from each of the 4 members that have spoken to us, we have been talking about, I think these are among the most excellent people that we have in these fields. And they are, it's not the case that we have a clear solution that has been proposed. We have talked more about what the problem is, what is the difficulty, rather than the solutions. But we need to break through somewhere. We need to find what we might call the leverage point to go on to break through. And we hope that the current regime, Prime Minister, I would like to talk to Matsukawa-san. there are lots of questions coming out and raising questions. Where do you think we should start, Representative Matsukawa? Where do you think is the appropriate point?
ミュートを外してください。
今聞こえなかったですね。失礼しました。
Sorry, you couldn't hear what I just said, I guess. Today, there are a lot of experts here that are much more of an expert than myself, so it's hard to take the floor. But the basic problem, I think, is that the status of the defense industry itself, it's not a question of maintaining our base. It's looking at this as a matter of defense policy, of security policy. I think that it's absolutely necessary to write that into our national security strategy, unless that is the level at which we look at it. And certainly not all companies are in the same position. Though large-scale ship makers are different than other companies, for example. So lots of different approaches could be used. But first would be to make public such a policy. I only had 10 minutes, so I didn't mention this, but new domains, quantum, cyber, new ways, drone swarms and defending against them. There will be a lot of countermeasures that will be necessary. And if you look at this, private sector technology is further ahead. And private technology includes universities. Japan has lots of different places capable of research. So in the defense area, it's important to be able to freely use this. The Japan Science Council is blocking this. This is a very important area to protect our skies, our seas, our citizens. In spite of that, we're still hearing about merchants of death or that universities can't work on this. So I'm not even so sure about the question of exclusive defense, but even exclusive defense. This is something that is defensive, but we are shooting ourselves in the foot in a sense. It's partly because of the post-war trauma, but unless we get over that, it'll be hard to make progress. I think that's the key. Lots of other things that one could do, increase the budget. But first of all, you have to change the status and the way that the problem is framed.
育てること自体が日本の安全保障政策なんだと明確に位置づけろという。
民間、これをとにかく使えるようにしないとダメです。
はい。
Also, you have to make it possible to use private sector technology.
For that purpose, what kind of policy should we be implementing? I would like to ask the remaining three panelists. Anyone would be fine. What do you think about the necessary policy steps?
それでは私から、
Okay.
谷口先生の質問には直接答えてないかもしれないんですが、
I may not have directly answered this. There were a lot of questions in the
輸出ができないかとかですね。
Why can't we export, for example? Or why should the Japanese domestic defense industry get weakened? Shouldn't we be able to improve this?
この部分は努力してもらっていると思ってるんですが、
I think that people are trying very hard in the Ministry of Defense, but
のところの作っている装備品の真の実力を知らなかったらダメだと思うん
I
ですね。
think there's a need to know what the real power of the domestically manufactured weapons are. And we didn't have this work to try to sell them overseas. We'd never had experience when we got it back to parties changed. So we didn't know how much value these weapons that we had created ourselves would have overseas. We never compared them. Luckily, we've never had war, so we didn't have any opportunity to use this equipment. When we worked with Australia, we tried, our marketing was poor. It was a fact that the reason we did so poorly was that we didn't know what the real capability of our own equipment was. So you have to know on an absolute basis what the values are. And for that purpose, we have to have first of all, this cooperation between government and industry. The incentives were small. So specifically, we shouldn't start by trying to sell huge weapons or huge equipment. We need to have small services, small components, and so forth. And then gradually the marketing will form, will increase in capability. We have to know, as has been discussed, what are the needs of the foreign countries that we're trying to sell to. Needs to make the effort to do this kind of marketing, and as that is accumulated, then the incentives will grow, and I think we will have the opportunities to correctly. China, as it grows quickly, the friction with, I think, is going to occur if we have to face that. We have to overcome that. I think that we do have that opportunity. Thank you very much. Japan's technical military technology. You're saying that the manufacturers themselves need to know more about the capabilities, and we need to understand better. I would like to ask you, Ibara-san, we have many participants in this webinar, particularly from overseas. There's one thing that is very difficult for them to understand, which is why academia and the industry, defense industry, and the self-defense force have virtually no coordination. In 10 years, 20 years, I don't know how long it will take. What do you think in terms of your own sense of crisis about this? How long is that going to take to develop? How should it develop? Igarashi. I think we want to be careful about how I answer this. Among academics, there are people who are very interested in defense, but from an organizational standpoint, there's very little interaction between academia and defense. In terms of this technology that is multi-use and has application in many fields, we need to be able to build bridges between these. And that has begun recently. It's going to take time for Japan to change. And in a big sense, it needs political leadership from the national security standpoint. That's going to take leadership, but with limited budgets to do we need to do to take advantage of the research that's done in both the private side and the public side. Thank you. Sakurabaya-san, each manufacturer has, you were saying their defense portions of those large industries are so small that it's very hard for them to focus on that. What do you think is the difficulties that each of these companies encounter in this area? And is there something that the government can do about that?
Yes, I think that in companies, the people working on matters are having a very difficult time. They even hesitate to talk about their defense activities on their web pages for fear of their reputation risks. And so exporting would be an even bigger step. So the government has to talk about how this is contributing to world peace. It's proactive contributions to peace. To create that kind of a proactive stance. Only limited items can be exported. So this has to be treated, export promotion has to be treated separately from maintaining our industrial base as a matter of strategy too.
Thank you. We are running out of time. I'm thinking about how we should wrap up best. Matsukawa-san, you are in the world of politics. I would like to ask your opinion. The new creation, the new plans for Japan defense, I think that Matsukawa-san is thinking about the role or the positioning of the defense industry. If so, what's the signaling message that should go out to the private industry?
私は今回の国家安保戦略は本日のテーマである防衛産業の維持。
No, the national security strategy deals not only with the subjects of today's webinar, export promotion and defense industrial base, but I believe that it has to move our strategy to the next stage. Deterrence. The interpretation of Article 9 has caused two obstacles to countering threats, and one is collective self-defense. This was solved with the 2015 peace and security legislation, but there's another barrier, and that was deterrence. And thanks to our new strategy, we hope to remove that obstacle. By boldly stating in the strategy that the maintenance of our industrial base and transfer of defense equipment is part of our defense strategy, I think that that would have a positive effect. And our party, I think, will move in this direction. But certainly it's a matter of politics. I don't think it will be easy, but if the status of this issue is changed, then this could be a big message from the government. This would change from something that we do at a minimum to something that we actively pursue for our defense. As Admiral Takei says, not just flashy defense items, but that which we really need, that's serious. I don't know if serious is the word, but true initiatives that aren't for show. And I think that 2022 will be the time when this changes. I think in the future, people will look back on it. The US-China confrontation, for various reasons, 2022 will be key, I believe.
Thank you, Matsukawa-san.
お答えしたいところで 時間が
I wanted to have everyone be able to answer each of the questions, but we've run out of time. Among the questions is, why don't we cooperate more with US? The US and England or Australia are focused?
お尋ね
Couldn't we
それは
work in the same way?
からの熱の
And then India's very enthusiastic approach to cooperating. We could even call it their pleas or requests to cooperate with Japan. We see these strong
秋
voices
から冬
each time we hold these webinars.
になる
Uh,
いい戦略
I
を
think that we will be looking at the new
日本は変わった
policy from the spring into the fall.
世論調査
And
皆様の声を
if we look at,
それで政府
if we were looking at the national opinions through polls, that's not something that is enough.
旗を
The leader, the prime minister, has to,
扱う
I think, take the lead on this.
そういうリーダー
And so we ask that you, Matsukawa, and your colleagues create such leaders. That's my personal plea or personal wish that you help create such field interpreters. So thank you very much for our interpreters today. We appreciate them.
それでは
And
4人
with
の
that,
パ
I
ネ
would
ルの
like
方
to
々今日は
end today's meeting and thank you to the four panelists. It's quite a late time in Japan. It was a lot of tension in this discussion. And I would like to represent everyone by expressing my appreciation for your participation.